It's Super Bowl Sunday. I'm Charlie Sykes, and Sunday Insight starts right now. Good morning and welcome to Sunday Insight. In the week that was, it must be Super Bowl week, right? The news is dominated by controversies about Deflategate and a GoDaddy puppy ad. A new poll shows strong support for right-to-work legislation. 69% of Wisconsinites say they support letting workers have the freedom to choose whether or not to join a union or pay them dues. A brutal multiple stabbing leaves a 5-month-old girl dead. And another bad week for Senator Tammy Baldwin. Baldwin's been embroiled in controversy over her failure to act on a report detailing opiate abuses at the Toma VA. She's still not giving interviews after a report that she fired one staffer and offered to pay her hush money. Not good. And Mitt Romney is out of the race for president. But we start with a proposed deal for the Milwaukee Bucks. It's called the Jock Tax. Last week, Governor Scott Walker proposed a new revenue to use revenue growth from the NBA to pay for $220 million in bonds to build a new downtown sports and entertainment complex. Walker stressed that there would be no new taxes. The team's owners and former owner Herb Cole have pledged $250 million of their own money for the project.
We're going to help the Milwaukee Bucks pay their own way to a new arena.
Walker's plan would not use the existing $6.5 million he says the Bucks and the other NBA players pay in state income tax now. Only new revenue that he says will grow sharply enough over the next 20 years or so to pay for the bonds. Walker also stressed that doing nothing would be costly for taxpayers. Between lost tax revenue and the cost of renovating the Bradley Center, taxpayers could lose $270 million if the Bucks left town. Still, early indications are the proposal could face an uphill fight in the legislature. Joining me on our panel this morning, defense attorney Dan Adams, former Speaker of the State Assembly Scott Jensen, political strategist Linda Bruin, and the managing editor of rightwisconsin.com, Colin Roth. Okay, you still have the scars from other stadium projects in the past, Miller Park, Lambeau Field. What does Governor Walker have to do to sell this plan, state support for a sports arena in downtown Milwaukee?
I think the first thing the governor has to do is to demonstrate to the legislature that these are new revenues that are solely the result of keeping the team here in a new arena. The second thing is I think the city and the county need to step up and make a contribution in this project. And third, I think they probably need to get a little bit more money for the owners. I still believe that this is a doable thing. Everyone said at the start with Miller Park, it's never going to happen. Lambeau Field, people had their doubts, and both of those got done.
That was bloody, though. And I guess the real question is, number one, you know, $220 million sounds like an awful lot of money. And as you point out, so far we've got absolutely nothing. No local skin in the game whatsoever. Nothing from Tom Barrett, nothing from Chris Abele. And that's something that comes up in all my conversations with legislators.
Oh, everybody in Madison, all the Republicans are going to see what are the city and county who will be the biggest beneficiaries going to be putting into this.
Okay, what do you think, Dan Adams?
Well, I was glad. I think this is an elegant solution to a really tough problem. And I'm frankly, as a Milwaukee city resident and county resident, I'm glad that the burden of this isn't totally on our shoulders and it's been diffused statewide, because this is a regional project that's going to help Ozaukee and Waukesha, Washington counties. So
okay, but when you say diffused statewide, I mean, you know, part of the sell job on this is to say that the taxpayers aren't going to be paying this, that you're not going to be having middle-class taxpayers pay higher property taxes, sales taxes, whatever taxes to fund this billionaire stadium.
And I think that's the elegance, of the solution. But it is still coming from the state income tax bucket. So
well, it is. So let me play devil's advocate. The governor says this is the Bucks paying their own way. No, they're not. This is state tax dollars, isn't it?
It's state tax dollars, and the state is on the hook for the risk. Now, this plan is innovative. I'll give them that. It's something that we didn't necessarily see coming when we heard jock tax throughout the weeks and months ahead of this solution. But I think it is sellable. I do agree with that. I think it's going to end up being a little bit smaller, and I think it's just vastly important to get some buy-in from local.
Okay. I'm going to be the pessimist of this group. He is counting on money that they don't have in hand. He's saying that new tax revenues, once we build the stadium, those dollars will flow. If Democrats were proposing this for something they wanted to build, the Republicans would be laughing up a storm, saying, how dare you, how fiscally irresponsible is this? You have got to go into this assuming that calculation is highly suspect and hypothetical, and that there's a very good chance that the state taxpayers will be making up those payments. To me, it's $220 million of taxpayer dollars.
And I do think the Republicans are going to be raising those issues issues legitimately. Now, the one variable that I think makes this more plausible is the fact that you do have the new NBA broadcast contract, which does look like it's bringing in new revenue. But you're right, there is a little bit of that on the come. There's a little bit of a shell game here. But what about the local buy-in? Because I see no way the legislature goes along with this unless Tom Barrett, and at least Tom Barrett, steps up on this. And so far, he's been AWOL.
Well, I think the problem for Tom Barrett and for the county executive is that the state, through the governor, is saying, well, we're going to pay for it with state money, money that's going to come in on the fly, whereas we want Milwaukee County and the city of Milwaukee to cough up real tax dollars now. And
well,
I think there's going to be...
They could do tax incremental financing, which is basically the same sort of thing.
They could. They could.
Okay, bottom line, just get through.
I think it's doable. I think it can be done.
Okay, so what is your glass half full this week? What is your glass half empty? Let's go around the table. Dan Adams, you are first.
My glass is half full because State Representative Dale Koyenga and Senator Alberta Darling have released a plan to help lessen poverty in Milwaukee. They join other Republicans like Paul Ryan, who have recently spoken out on the GOP's need to address urban poverty. My glass is half empty because it appears Milwaukee's Democratic politicians have no interest in collaborating on the legislation, content, it seems, to take partisan shots rather than work on solutions.
Scott Jensen.
My glass is half empty because the Packers are not in today's Super Bowl. My glass is half full because one of the two coaches we love to hate is sure to lose today.
Linda Bruin.
My glass is half full because Senator Lindsey Graham said he is tired of just complaining, which means he might actually start working on solutions to our nation's problems. But my glass is half empty because Graham may run for president. Just what we need, another presidential candidate who has spent his career complaining instead of finding solutions.
Colin Roth.
Well, left and right here, Dan and I have almost the exact same thing because my glass is half full because Republican lawmakers Alberta Darling and Dale Koyenga unveiled an innovative package of reforms to enhance opportunity in some of the poorest neighborhoods in Milwaukee. My glass is half empty because most Milwaukee Democrats could only attack, mock, and assign evil motives to the ideas instead of engaging in a real dialogue.
Well, my glass is half full because Mitt Romney decided not to run for president and make way for a fresh face in 2016. My glass is half empty because Jeb Bush and Hillary Clinton are still running. Next on Sunday Insight, will lawmakers agree to cut $300 million from the University of Wisconsin's budget? Big cuts ahead for the University of Wisconsin, but also some new flexibility and independence. Now, Governor Walker's budget will include a $300 million cut in state aid to the UW system over the next biennium. During an interview with me last week, Walker suggested that now might be a good time for the system's faculty to actually teach and work more, suggesting that professors teach one extra class a week. A study by the American Council of Trustees and Alumni suggests that just by teaching that one extra class, UW-Madison could add more than 1,900 courses and take in $139 million a year in extra tuition. UW officials punched back, saying that critics just don't understand how hard professors work. We've had this debate before. Who do you see coming out on top, Colin Roth?
Yeah, I think taxpayers and tuition payers are going to come out on top. I think people want a lot more bang for their buck, and something like the UW system, we're going to see. I'm not sure if this cut will survive in its total $300 million.
Right.
That might be a bit much, and I think there are some concerns on the back end of this of whether tuition gets hiked up in 2017. But it's something that needs to be taken a look at, and it's being framed.
Some conservatives have actually raised that question in the legislature, saying if we cut them loose, what stops them from raising tuition by double digits? What's the answer to that?
And I think it's a valid concern, and it's something that needs to be explained.
Okay, Linda Bruin.
You know, I have a real problem with this proposal. This is would be the largest cut in UW's history. And I think that when the governor added, his add-on phrase about the faculty basically not working hard enough, I think that displays a real lack of understanding about what faculty professors do in the UW system and all over this country. My daughter is a university professor, and the starting pay for a professor at UW, Madison, and Milwaukee is $53,000 a year. They work some 50 to 60 hours a week. It's adding a new class is probably another 15 to 20 hours a week. So in this case, I think that what the governor, I think he's taking a cheap shot in order to sell his $300 million
you know what?
cut.
I understand that this is not my first time to the rodeo. This has been something that people have talked about for 40 or 50 years, the flight from teaching. The reality is that teachers at big universities teach less than, I think that the average is 1.8 class. They're in the classroom for about 5 hours a week. And the reality is that right now we have an education bubble. You have middle-class families that are struggling to pay tuition, paying crushing loans. So when the governor, and I don't see he's taking a cheap shot at the faculty, he's saying, how about making some of these faculty, and by the way, faculty that make $200,000, $300,000 a year, how about make them more accessible to students?
The highest pay for a professor in the UW system is $123,000.
That is absolutely not true. That is absolutely flat out false. So the question is you've been through this before. I mean, that's not the magic bullet, but I think it's interesting that the university is pushing back on this one suggestion that the governor made. If you see this as a student rights, student access issue, I don't see how UW wins that argument.
No, they're pushing on the wrong thing. Their pride was hurt,
yeah,
and they're responding emotionally. They should be responding logically here. They have long asked for this sort of flexibility, and they're going to need it because the higher education model we have in this country is way too costly and is soon going to be obsolete. Technology is going to dramatically change the way we do higher education.
Okay, Dan.
I tend to agree with most of Lynn's sentiment, but there is fat in the UW system. For example, UW-Milwaukee has a paid lobbyist on staff who makes $168,000 a year. That's $30,000 more than the governor of the state of Wisconsin makes. So while I agree that there's many faculty members who are being pushed to the brink, there's some fat at the administrative level.
There's a lot of fat.
I agree at the administrative level.
And of course you also have the Taj Mahal, and the reality is that in the UW system, I think there's something like 400 staffers who make more than the governor of the state of Wisconsin. Now, one of the real problems that I think we ought to be dealing with is instead of protecting the tenured faculty, is looking at students, and it is very difficult for students throughout the university system to get a degree in 4 years. So you have 4 years, 5 years, 6 years. It is costly, and the reality is at some point something's got to give, and we have to address the priorities of higher education. Now, you may not want to hear it, but we're going to tell you anyway. Let's hand out some unsolicited advice. Dan Adams, you're first.
To the state GOP, show actual commitment to our nation's veterans. Abandon the terrible I-94 expansion plans that would disrupt and disrespect the Zablocki VA Center, the historical Soldiers Home, and Wood National Cemetery, where 40,000 vets are laid to rest.
Scott Jensen.
My advice is for the Democratic Party. Instead of knocking Governor Walker for being absent from Wisconsin while campaigning for president, consider waking up Mayor Barrett. Scott Walker has led on more issues affecting Milwaukee in the last 10 days than Tom Barrett has in the last 10 years.
Linda Bruin.
Wow. In the last presidential election, Obama and Romney raised about $1 billion each, which is about the same amount of money the Koch brothers plan to spend on the 2016 election. When two people spend as much money as an entire political party, we no longer have a democracy. Republicans, don't let these men turn your party or our nation into an oligarchy.
Colin Roth.
My unsolicited advice is for Republican legislators in Madison to pay attention to the new polls that show overwhelming support to right to work, and then get it done this session.
Well, I'm going to repeat myself here. My unsolicited advice is to UW President Ray Cross. There are middle-class parents struggling to pay tuition and loans, and they're not going to buy your argument that it's mean to expect professors who may make more than $100,000 or $200,000 a year to actually teach their kids. Next on Sunday Insight, what does this ad say about Governor Scott Walker's plans for his future? A Scott Walker boomlet. One national publication after another is writing about the Walker buzz and momentum. And then there's Walker. Last week, he formed a national political organization and even launched what looks like the first presidential campaign ad, this video.
We understand that true freedom and prosperity doesn't come from the mighty hand of the government. It comes from empowering people to live their own lives and control their own destiny through the dignity that comes from work. In America, we take a day off to celebrate the 4th of July and not the 15th of April, because in America, we celebrate our independence from the government, not our dependence on it.
Of 2015, and we're already in this presidential race. I admit I'm amazed how fast it's going. Linda Bruin.
Right, yeah. It is absolutely amazing, and Scott certainly looks like that's an ad for someone who's running for president.
Well, yes.
Absolutely.
He is running for president.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no doubt about it. Okay, Scott Jensen, though, handicap, who are the top 3 candidates right now? I mean, leaving out our home state bias, whatever that might be, who are the top 3?
Well, clearly Jeb Bush is in the top 3. He's going to raise $100 million in very short order. He has the fame, he has the funds to sustain himself through the next year. I think Scott Walker has clearly broken out of the pack. I travel all over the country talking to political leaders. everyone, as soon as I say I'm from Wisconsin, asks me about him. They're very excited about him. So I think it's Bush, it's Walker, and I think Rand Paul has a good shot at being the top 3.
Do you agree with that, Colin Roth?
Yeah, I would add Walker and Bush, but I might add in someone like Marco Rubio, I think, who's not quite in it yet, but is going to generate a lot
among the
of buzz.
conservative donors, among the activists, among the conservative media, that it's hard to overstate what a big week Walker had.
No, yeah, he had a major week, and he really separated himself.
Okay, Dan Adams.
Well, as a Democrat and someone who likes comedy, I wish Sarah Palin would stick around a little longer.
Yeah.
I mean, she was just abysmal this week.
Sorry.
But Walker's having a good week, but you know what? Herman Cain had a great week back in 2012. Santorum, Huckabee. You know, we have this process of Donald Trump had a big week back in 2012. We have this process of the first among equals, but then they weed themselves out.
I hate to say this, Dan, but that's a really good point. There is that flavor of the month. Guys rise up and they become, there's going to be a moment when Ben Carson's going to be leading the polls, maybe Herman Cain comes back. So how do you distinguish? Is Scott Walker the flavor of the week, or is he really in, you know, is he going to be able to be in for the long run?
So he's caught a wave.
Yeah.
He's riding high. He needs to fill in now with money and with staff, and those are two very hard things. He needs to raise $35 to $50 million in fairly short order, and he needs to hire a lot of people he's never met before who know how to run presidential campaigns.
He has to avoid the long knives of people like Chris Christie, the Bush clan, people that he's never had to confront.
Yeah.
But you know, I actually am surprised because I actually think he's in the top 3 or 4.
He is.
In
no
this
question about
snapshot
it.
in time, he absolutely. But literally 6 months ago, I would not have thought he'd be that high up at this point in time. So the trick is to keep it going. And as you said, Scott, if he doesn't raise big money, which is his biggest hurdle, he will fizzle out.
I think that he is as well positioned as any other candidate, with the exception of Jeb Bush in raising candidates, because, you know, through the recall, he had contact with virtually every big donor. I think he's better positioned than, say, Marco Rubio, but it's going to be tough. Now, what is it you don't get this week? Let's go around the table. Dan Adams, you're first.
Charlie, what I don't get is why whoever is advising New Bucks owner Wes Edens is telling him to blow off the community organizing group Common Ground. This group has tremendous and diverse support across Milwaukee. What harm could come from a meeting?
Scott Jensen.
What I don't get is why the president gave a speech about helping more people get a college education and then proposed a budget that raised taxes on college savings accounts. Yeah. You know, you've really messed up when even Nancy Pelosi joins with the Republicans to criticize your position.
Linda Bruin.
Well, after years of Sarah Palin displaying her poor knowledge base, and after her bizarre speech in Iowa last week, what I don't get is why any Republican still thinks she's a viable candidate for president.
Who?
Yeah,
Colin Roth.
I don't think many do. What I don't get is why Senator Tammy Baldwin cannot tell the widow of a deceased Marine who overdosed at the Toma VA facility whether she actually read the Inspector General report her office received in August documenting the abuse.
Well, what I don't get, do Tom Barrett and Chris Abele really think that the state is going to build them a new sports arena without them having to lift a finger? And by the way, where is Chris Abele? Next on Sunday Inside, our panel picks the winners and losers of the week. But first, here's your morning news update. It's time for our panel to pick the winners and losers of the week. Dan Adams, you're first.
My winner, Democratic Governor Andrew Cuomo of New York, who this week criticized his state's failing educational status quo, saying if the public understood what was happening with education to their children, they would take City Hall down brick by brick. Governor, Milwaukeeans know the feeling. My losers, law enforcement budgets that have been fattened by years of civil asset forfeitures. That's when the police take citizens' money for their own use, even when the owners are never charged with a crime. Nationwide, bipartisan reform of this practice is coming.
Scott Jensen.
My winners this week are the restaurants and the hotels of Iowa. The caucus scramble is on, and millions of dollars from around the country are on their way to Iowa. My losers this week are the Wisconsin veterans who have been so badly served by the VA facility in Toma. So wrong.
Linda Bruin.
Well, all I had to do was listen to Governor Walker's twin announcements last Tuesday to learn of some big winners and losers in his next budget. Walker's big loser, as we mentioned, is the UW system. He's proposing a $300 million cut, their largest in UW's history. And to justify it, he followed up his plan with an attack on the faculty, saying they don't work hard enough. Yeah. Conversely, the Milwaukee Bucks are big winners in the budget. Governor Walker wants the state to spend $220 million for a new arena. Not hard to figure out where the arena payments will come from, is it?
Colin Roth.
My winner this week is State Representative Rob Hutton for having the courage to introduce a new bill to eliminate the prevailing wage, a long overdue, common sense reform that can save taxpayers and local governments boatloads of money on capital projects. My loser this week is the Obama White House, who through multiple spokesmen could not bring themselves to call the Taliban a terrorist group. Good grief.
Well, winner Scott Walker had a hell of a week. Rave reviews for his speech in Iowa, presidential buzz turning into a boomlet. Loser Scott Walker, his meteoric rise means there's a target on his back from both the left and the right. It's going to get ugly, but then he's used to that, isn't he? And of course, there's all of us Packer fans who are sitting home with Brandon Bostic had caught that ball. Can imagine what would be. Okay, I'll let it go. I'll let it go. Tune in to my radio show Monday morning on News Radio 620, WTMJ from 8:30 until noon. Have a great week.